The dryer in the detached garage hummed a low, rhythmic vibration that I could feel through the soles of my sneakers. I pulled a load of warm towels from the drum, the scent of cheap lavender detergent clinging to the fabric. Outside, the trade winds pushed through the screens of our brick bungalow. But the humidity still held a heavy weight, the kind that made my hair curl, and the laundry feel damp the moment it hit the air. I folded the towels on the workbench, smoothing out the wrinkles with the palm of my hand. Saturday mornings followed a strict sequence. Laundry first, then meal prep for the week, then a quick check of the household budget. Jason handled the primary finances, which made sense given his role as a bank branch supervisor. He liked the spreadsheets and the predictability of numbers. I focused on the clinical precision of my work as a dental hygienist, where a single millimeter of plaque or a slight tremor in my hand mattered. "Do we have more of the ginger for the stir-fry?" Jason asked, leaning against the doorframe of the garage. He was already dressed in a polo shirt and khakis, looking as if he were ready for a midday meeting, even though it was barely 10. "It's in the crisper," I said, tossing a folded hand towel into the basket. "I bought extra on Thursday." "Good. Your mother-in-law wants to have a family dinner tonight. She's feeling a bit fragile this week," he added, his voice softening. I looked at him, wondering when Jennifer had mentioned feeling fragile. She had been in the living room all morning, reading a magazine and sipping tea, looking perfectly composed. Jennifer was 76 and retired, living with us in the guest wing. She was a quiet presence, though her needs often became the focal point of Jason's attention. He took pride in being the primary caregiver, the one who coordinated her doctor's visits and managed her medications. I helped where I could, but Jason usually had a system in place that left little room for my input. "I can handle the cooking," I said. "Just let me finish the linens." "I've already got the menu planned," Jason replied with a small, tight smile. "I'll help you with the chopping." I went back to the laundry, feeling a familiar, slight pinch of exclusion. Jason's efficiency was a strength at the bank, but at home, it often felt like a fence he built around the family's needs, leaving me to simply occupy the space he designated for me. I accepted it because it meant I didn't have to worry about the logistics of Jennifer's care. It was a trade-off that felt fair at the time. Monday morning arrived with the usual rush of Kahului traffic. I checked my work email during the commute, scanning for any last-minute cancellations or schedule changes. My clinic was a busy practice, and the pace was grueling, but I liked the order of it. I liked the way a patient's gums looked after a thorough cleaning and the quiet satisfaction of a well-organized tray of instruments. The office smelled of mint and antiseptic. I spent the first 4 hours of my shift in a blur of ultrasonic scalers and polishing paste. Between patients, I chatted with Mia, another hygienist who had been with the practice for 10 years. Mia was the kind of person who knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. But she was kind and always had a spare set of gloves if you ran out. During our shared lunch break, Mia leaned over the counter, her expression sympathetic. "I'm really glad you're taking some pressure off yourself, Sam," she said, popping a grape into her mouth. "I know how stressful it can be when things get heavy at home." I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean?" "The schedule," Mia said, gesturing toward the office manager's door. "I heard you've been looking to scale back your hours. I think Sarah is already working on adjusting your Friday afternoons so you can be with your mother-in-law more. It's a smart move. Family comes first." I set my fork down. The feeling in my chest was a sudden sharp coldness. "I never asked to scale back my hours," I said. Mia blinked, her brow furrowing. "Wait, really?" "Sarah mentioned it in the morning huddle. She said you'd reached out and mentioned that Jennifer's health was becoming a priority and that you needed more flexibility. She said it came from you directly." I felt a flicker of confusion. I hadn't spoken to Sarah, the office manager, about my schedule in 3 months. My Fridays were my most productive hours, and I relied on those full shifts to keep our contributions to the mortgage balanced. I had mentioned to Jason a few weeks ago that I was hoping for the senior hygienist promotion, which would require me to maintain a full-time presence and take on more administrative duties. "I didn't say anything to Sarah," I told Mia, my voice sounding thinner than I wanted. I haven't even had a private conversation with her this month. Mia looked genuinely puzzled. That's weird. Sarah was pretty specific. She said you were worried about the commute and the time you were spending away from the house. She sounded like she was doing you a favor by making the place change before you even had to formally request it. I stood up, the plastic chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. My mind raced through the last few days. Jason had been the one handling the phone calls for Jennifer's specialists. He had been the one managing the shared family calendar on the fridge. I need to talk to her, I said. Just be careful, Mia whispered. Sarah thinks she's being supportive. If you go in there too hot, it might look like you're flip-flopping. I walked toward Sarah's office, my heart hammering against my ribs. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. A miscommunication between Sarah and someone else. But as I reached the door, I remembered Jason's comment about Jennifer feeling fragile on Saturday. He had said it with such certainty, as if he were the only one who truly understood the gravity of the situation. I realized I hadn't actually asked Jennifer how she was feeling once that entire weekend. I had just trusted Jason's report. I knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the small hallway. Sarah looked up from her monitor and smiled, a look of professional kindness that suddenly felt like a wall. Sam, just the person I wanted to see. I've got those Friday adjustments drafted. Do you want to look them over now? Or should we wait until the end of the day? I stepped into the office and closed the door behind me, cutting off the sound of the waiting room. Sarah leaned back in her ergonomic chair, her expression open and helpful. I didn't ask for any adjustments, Sarah, I said. My voice was steady, but my pulse was thumping in my fingertips. I haven't mentioned scaling back my hours to anyone. Sarah's smile faltered. She looked at me, then glanced down at her monitor. That's strange. I have an email right here from your personal account sent last Tuesday. It said you were dealing with some escalating health issues with your mother-in-law and that you needed Friday. Afternoons cleared for the foreseeable future. I felt a sudden dizzying shift in the room. I hadn't sent any such email. I didn't even open my personal mail on my work computer. Can you forward that to me? Sarah clicked a few buttons, and the notification popped up on my phone. I stared at the screen. The wording was precise, professional, and utterly foreign. It sounded like a bank memo. It used words like foreseeable future and care coordination. It was Jason's voice, typed out in my account. I also had a call from your husband on Wednesday, Sarah added, her tone shifting to one of cautious concern. He said you were too overwhelmed to talk, and that he wanted to make sure we didn't overbook you. He sounded very concerned about your stress levels. Sam, he said you'd been struggling to balance everything. The coldness in my chest turned into a hard, hot knot. Jason had the password to my email. He'd used it to rewrite my professional reputation as overwhelmed and unstable while I was in the next room scaling teeth. I am not overwhelmed, I told her, and I didn't authorize any of this. Please put my Fridays back on the schedule immediately. Sarah sighed, a small, tight sound. She looked at me with a pity that made my skin crawl. I can do that, of course, but Sam, I have to be honest. Dr. Aris was just asking me about the senior hygienist opening. He wants someone who can anchor the Friday clinic and handle the new hire training. With this volatility, I don't think I can recommend you for the promotion right now. Not until we know your home situation is stable. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that the only thing unstable in my life was the man who claimed to be my partner. Instead, I just nodded, my jaw locked so tight it ached. I understand. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of mechanical movements. I worked through my remaining patients, but I felt like I was watching myself from a distance. Every time Mia glanced at me, I wondered what else Sarah had told her. I wondered how many other concerns Jason had voiced to people I trusted. The drive home to the bungalow was a slow crawl through the humid Kahuli afternoon. The trade winds were kicking up, rattling the palm fronds against the power lines. I didn't call Jason. I didn't text him. I just drove, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. When I pulled into the driveway, the detached garage was open, and I could see Jason inside, tinkering with a shelf he'd been meaning to install for months. He looked peaceful. He looked like a man who had successfully managed a problem without the problem, ever knowing it existed. I walked past him without a word, the screen door slamming behind me. Jennifer was in the living room, sitting in her favorite wingback chair with a crossword puzzle in her lap. She looked up as I entered, her eyes milky but kind. "Hello, Samantha. You're home early," she said. The sight of her, so calm, so seemingly fragile, triggered something in me. I thought about the email. I thought about the escalating health issues Jason had invented to make me look unreliable. I assumed Jennifer had been the catalyst. I assumed she had played the part of the ailing mother to get Jason to push me out of the office, ensuring I'd be home to do the laundry, the cooking, and the hovering that Jason preferred she have, but didn't want to provide himself. "How fragile are you today, Jennifer?" I snapped, my voice echoing in the small room. Jennifer blinked, the pen pausing over the paper. "I'm sorry, the health issues, the crises." I stepped closer, my voice rising. "Did you tell Jason you were getting worse? Did you tell him you needed me here every Friday afternoon? Is that the game we're playing now? You pretend to be falling apart so I can lose my promotion and spend my afternoons folding your linens?" Jennifer's face went pale. She didn't recoil. She just seemed to shrink into the chair. "I don't know what you're talking about, Samantha. I've felt quite well this month. In fact, I told Jason last week that I wanted to start taking that watercolor class at the community center on Fridays." I froze. The anger was still there, but it suddenly had nowhere to go. "A watercolor class?" "Yes," Jennifer whispered, her voice trembling. "Jason told me it was too much for me. He said I should stay home and rest, that the travel would be too taxing. He told me he'd handle the registration and just cancel it." The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the distant sound of Jason humming in the garage. I looked at my mother-in-law, a woman I had just accused of manipulation, and realized she was just as trapped in Jason's system as I was. She wasn't the architect. She was another piece of furniture he was rearranging to suit his needs. I had let my anger drive me to attack the only person in the house who wasn't lying to me. The silence that followed my outburst was heavy, thick as the humidity clinging to the bungalow's walls. Jennifer didn't cry or shout. She just looked at me with a sort of distant, bewildered sadness, as if I were a stranger who had suddenly broken into her home. She slowly folded her crossword puzzle and stood up, her movements stiff. "I think I'll go to my room now," she said softly. I reached out a hand, the anger having vanished as quickly as it had arrived, leaving only a cold, hollow shame. "Jennifer, I'm sorry. I didn't. I just found out some things about my work, and I took it out on you." "I know you didn't do it." She didn't look back. She just walked down the hall to the guest wing, the soft click of her door sounding like a gavel. For the next 3 days, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Jennifer's didn't stop being polite, but the warmth was gone. She stopped asking me about my day. She stopped offering me tea in the afternoons. When we were in the same room, she kept her eyes on her book or the television, avoiding my gaze. I had spent years building a quiet, stable rapport with her, and in 10 seconds of blind rage, I'd burned it down. I tried to apologize again over dinner on Tuesday, but she just gave me a thin, tight smile and said she was tired. The trust was gone. She now saw me as the volatile one, the one who snapped. I spent those days at the clinic trying to perform a delicate balancing act. I was meticulously on time, my trays were perfect, and I was overly pleasant to Sarah. I wanted to prove that I was the anchor Dr. Aris needed. I could feel Sarah watching me, her eyes scanning for any sign of the volatility Jason had described. Wednesday was the day of the quarterly staff review. It wasn't a formal performance evaluation, but it was the meeting where Dr. Aris usually discussed upcoming leadership roles and training assignments. I had spent the morning prepping a list of suggestions for the new hire onboarding process, hoping to show that I was already thinking like a senior hygienist. I was in the middle of a difficult cleaning on a patient with severe periodontal disease when my phone buzzed on the counter. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. Mia caught my eye and pointed to the screen. It was Jason. 3 missed calls and a text that made my heart stop. Emergency. Jennifer collapsed in the kitchen. "I can't get her to respond properly. I'm calling 911, but you need to get here now." The world tilted. I looked at my patient, who was mid-rinse, and then at the phone. The panic was instantaneous. I didn't think about the email or the fragile comments from the previous week. I only thought about Jennifer, the woman I had screamed at, the woman who was already terrified of me. "I'm so sorry," I told the patient, my voice shaking. "I have a family emergency. Mia, can you take over?" I didn't wait for Sarah's permission. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the parking lot, my sneakers skidding on the asphalt. I drove back to Kahului like a madwoman, ignoring a stop sign and nearly clipping a curb. My mind was a loop of the worst-case scenarios. A stroke, a heart attack, a fall that had left her unconscious. When I burst through the front door, I expected to see paramedics. I expected the chaos of a medical crisis. Instead, I found Jason in the kitchen, calmly pouring a glass of water. Jennifer was sitting at the kitchen table, looking slightly pale but entirely conscious, sipping a cup of tea. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, no oxygen tanks. "Where are they?" I gasped, leaning against the doorframe, my chest heaving. "Where are the paramedics?" Jason looked at me with a mask of profound concern. "Oh, honey, you're here." I called 911, but by the time the dispatcher got through, she came around. It was just a brief syncopal episode, a little dizzy spell. I told the operator we didn't need the ambulance after all. I stared at him. "A dizzy spell? You said she collapsed." She wasn't responding. "She was out for a few seconds," Jason said, stepping toward me and placing a hand on my shoulder. "It was terrifying. I didn't know what else to do. I knew you'd want to be here." I looked at Jennifer. She didn't look terrified. She looked exhausted. She didn't meet my eyes. She just stared into her tea, her shoulders slumped. She had probably felt a momentary lightheadedness, something common for a 76-year-old. And Jason had turned it into a catastrophe to ensure I left my office in a panic. The realization hit me with a sickening thud. He hadn't just lied. He had used my guilt over my previous outburst to manipulate me. He knew I was desperate to make things right with Jennifer, and he used that desperation to pull me away from the most important meeting of the month. "Did you actually call 911? I asked, my voice low. "I tried," Jason said smoothly. "But the line was spotty." By the time I got a signal, she was fine. I knew he was lying. I knew the cell service in our brick bungalow was perfect. I walked back to the living room and sat on the edge of the sofa, the adrenaline draining out of me and leaving a bitter residue. I checked my phone. I had a missed call from Sarah and a brief email. "Sam, Dr. Eris was disappointed you missed the review. We discussed the senior role. And given the timing of your departure today, he feels that your current home obligations are simply too unpredictable for the position. We'll keep your current hours as they are. Let's touch base on Monday." I didn't cry. I just sat there in the quiet of the house, listening to the trade winds rattle the screens. Jason came into the room a few minutes later, his expression one of supportive husbandly care. "I'm just glad you're here, Sam," he said. "We really need you around more. Jennifer just isn't as strong as she used to be." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the efficient bank supervisor or the devoted son. I saw a man who was carefully pruning my life, cutting away every branch that grew too far from his reach. He didn't want me to be a senior hygienist. He didn't want me to have the authority or the income that came with the promotion. He wanted me exactly where I was, available, dependent, and convinced that I was the unstable one in the house. I looked over at Jennifer, who was still in the kitchen. She wouldn't look at me, and I knew it wasn't just because of the dizzy spell. It was because I had shown her a version of myself that Jason could now use as a weapon. I had given him the evidence he needed to tell her that I was the problem. I had lost the promotion, and I had lost the only ally I had in the house, all while Jason stood by and watched, humming a quiet tune in the garage. Jason stayed in the living room, his hand still resting on my shoulder. The gesture, which used to feel like a comfort, now felt like a claim. I stepped away from him, moving toward the kitchen table where Jennifer sat. She didn't look up from her tea, but her hand trembled slightly against the porcelain cup. "I know you didn't call 911, Jason," I said. My voice was flat, the clinical tone I used when explaining a periodontal chart to a patient. "And I know you sent that email to Sarah from my account." Jason's hand dropped. He didn't jump or look surprised. He simply sighed and leaned back against the wall, his expression shifting from faux concern to a weary sort of patience. "I did what was necessary for this family, Sam," he said. "You were pushing yourself too hard. You're always talking about that promotion, always stressing over the hours. Jennifer needs us. She's getting older, and the stress of the house was starting to show on you. I just smoothed things over so you could breathe." "You didn't smooth anything over," I replied. "You lied to my boss. You made me look unstable. You cost me the senior hygienist position." "It's just a title," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "You still have your job. You still have your income. Now you have more time to actually be present here, instead of obsessing over a leadership role that would have just added more to your plate." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized the depth of the bypass. He hadn't just made a mistake in judgment. He had decided that my professional ambitions were a problem to be managed. He had viewed my career as a variable he could adjust to ensure his own comfort and the stability of his preferred household routine. He could have told me he was worried about Jennifer. He could have asked me to scale back. Instead, he chose concealment and manipulation over a difficult, honest conversation. "I am a grown woman, Jason. I decide how much I can handle," I said. "And look how you handled it," he countered, gesturing toward Jennifer. "You screamed at your mother-in-law because you were stressed. You're not as composed as you think you are." The comment hit home because it was true. I turned to Jennifer. She was still staring into her tea, her face a mask of exhaustion. I felt the weight of the last few days. The way I had let my frustration with Jason bleed into my treatment of her. "Jennifer," I said, stepping closer. "I am so sorry. I was angry, and I took it out on you. I accused you of manipulating Jason just because I was hurting. I realize now that being angry did not make my first accusation accurate. You didn't do anything to me, and you didn't deserve to be yelled at." Jennifer finally looked up. Her eyes were clouded, but there was a flicker of something, maybe relief, maybe just fatigue. She didn't offer a grand forgiveness. She didn't tell me it was okay. She just nodded once, a small, stiff movement. "I just want to go to my watercolor class," she whispered. "You will," I said. "I'll drive you myself on Fridays if I have to." Jason cleared his throat, stepping back into the conversation. "Now, let's not get carried away. We need to look at the budget for next month. With the high cost of the new medications for Jennifer." "I don't care about the budget right now," I interrupted. "I care about the fact that you've been operating my life from the sidelines." I walked past him into the hallway and went into the guest wing to help Jennifer to her room. Once she was settled, I went back to the kitchen and sat down at the table. I pulled out my phone and spent the next 20 minutes changing every single password I owned. My email, my bank login, my social media, and the security code on my phone. When I finished, I looked at Jason. He was standing by the counter, watching me with a frown. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Setting a boundary," I said. "You no longer have access to my digital life. Not for smoothing things over. Not for helping, and not for any other reason. From now on, if you have a concern about my schedule or Jennifer's health, you will tell me directly. If you try to contact my office or impersonate me again, I will treat it as a legal matter." Jason scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "You're being dramatic. We're a married couple. We share a life. We share a house and a mortgage," I corrected him. "But you've spent the last few months treating me like an employee you can manage. That ends today." "And what about the care for your mother-in-law?" he asked, his voice hardening. "Who's going to handle the coordination if you're too busy being a senior hygienist that you aren't actually?" "We'll split it," I said, "equally. I'll take the Tuesday and Thursday appointments. You take Monday and Wednesday. And on Fridays, Jennifer goes to her class." Jason didn't agree. He didn't apologize. He just stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked out to the detached garage. A few seconds later, I heard the rhythmic, metallic sound of him tinkering with his shelf, the noise echoing through the bungalow. I stayed at the table for a long time, listening to the trade winds rattle the screens. The house felt different. Colder, perhaps, but clearer. I had lost the promotion. Sarah's email had been definitive, and Dr. Aris had already made up his mind. That was a concrete loss, a gap in my resume, and a hit to my earning potential that I would have to live with for a while. I thought about the clinic, about the way Mia had looked at me with pity, and the way Sarah had viewed me as volatile. I knew it would take months, maybe years, to scrub that image away. I would have to be the most reliable, most stable person in that office just to get back to where I had been. I looked toward the hallway leading to the guest wing. I had damaged my relationship with Jennifer, and while my apology had been honest, the trust wasn't just going to snap back into place. I had let Jason's secrecy push me into a version of myself I didn't recognize. I stood up and began to clear the tea things from the table. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. I didn't know if my marriage could survive the shift in power, or if Jason would find a new way to prune my life. All I knew was that I was no longer folding the linens in silence, while someone else wrote my story. 3 weeks later, the humidity in Kahului shifted into a damp, clinging mist that blurred the edges of the mountains. I spent my Tuesday mornings in a state of high alert, treating the clinic like a minefield. Every interaction with Sarah was a calculated move. I arrived 15 minutes early, kept my workstation spotless, and avoided any conversation that wasn't strictly clinical. The senior hygienist position had been filled by a woman from another practice in Wailuku. Every time I saw her training the new hire, a task that should have been mine, a sharp, cold needle of resentment poked at my chest. The pay difference wasn't enough to bankrupt us. But the loss of the title felt like a permanent mark on my record, a quiet confirmation that I was viewed as the unreliable one. The real-world test came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was mid-procedure on a patient when the office phone rang. Sarah stepped out of her office and looked through the glass partition, gesturing for me to take it during my 3-minute gap. "Underwood here," I said, leaning against the counter. "Hi, Samantha. This is Brenda from Dr. Holloway's office," the receptionist said. "Your husband called about 20 minutes ago. He wanted to move Jennifer's 4 p.m. appointment to 2 p.m. today. He mentioned you were having some scheduling volatility at the clinic and that it would be easier for you to leave early. We just wanted to verify that with you before we bumped another patient." I felt the air leave my lungs. The scheduling volatility phrase was a direct echo of the language Jason had used in the email to Sarah. He had tried to manage my time again, not by talking to me, but by manipulating a third party to create a situation where I would be forced to leave work. He had bet on the fact that I would just go along with it once the appointment was changed. "The appointment stays at 4 p.m., I told Brenda. "I am the primary contact for Tuesdays. Please mark the file so that any changes must be confirmed by me directly. Thank you." I hung up and stared at the white-tiled wall. My hands were shaking, but I didn't let the patient see it. I finished the cleaning, walked out to my car, and drove home in silence. Jason was in the kitchen, prepping a salad. He looked up as I walked in, his expression a mask of helpfulness. "I tried to move Jennifer's appointment up," he said, not looking away from the lettuce. "I thought it would give you a break. You've seemed so tense lately, and I figured if we got her in earlier, you could actually relax for an hour before dinner." "You called the doctor's office and told them I was having scheduling volatility," I said. Jason stopped chopping. He set the knife down with a slow, deliberate click. "I was trying to help. You're always complaining about the pressure at work. I just wanted to smooth things over so you wouldn't have to stress about the timing." "You don't get to smooth my life, Jason. We had a deal. You tell me directly or you stay out of it." "I'm your husband," he replied, his voice dropping an octave. "I'm allowed to care about your well-being. If you're so fragile that a phone call to a cardiologist ruins your day, maybe Sarah was right about the volatility." The temptation to scream was a physical pressure in my throat. I wanted to throw the salad bowl across the room. Instead, I leaned over the counter, my voice low and precise. "I'm not fragile, I'm observant, and I'm documenting this." He scoffed, but he didn't argue further. He went back to his salad, the rhythmic thud of the knife resuming. He hadn't apologized, and he hadn't admitted that he was trying to maintain a level of control that made him the sole coordinator of the household. He still believed his secrecy was a form of kindness. I walked into the guest wing. Jennifer was sitting by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. She looked smaller than she had a month ago. Her shoulders rounded. "I'm taking you to the doctor at 4, Jennifer," I said softly. She turned to me. There was no warmth in her eyes, but the bewilderment was gone. She looked at me with a cautious, distant kind of respect, as if I were a storm she was learning how to navigate. I helped Jennifer into the car, the rain still misting against the windshield. As we drove through the wet streets of Kahului, she spoke for the first time in an hour. "I bought new brushes," she said, her voice thin but steady. "The ones with the synthetic bristles. Jason said they were a waste of money, but I liked the way they held the paint." I didn't tell her that Jason had tried to cancel her class. I just nodded and kept my eyes on the road. When we returned home, Jason was in the garage again, the sound of his tools a constant, humming background to our lives. I went to my room and opened my laptop to check my work schedule for the next month. I was still just a hygienist, my name absent from the leadership list, my paycheck unchanged. The promotion was a ghost, a reminder of the price I had paid for a boundary I should have set years ago. I had kept my job and my passwords, but the silence in the bungalow had become a permanent resident. I sat in the quiet, listening to the wind, knowing that while I had stopped the sabotage, I hadn't fixed the marriage.